right? Okay. How will this affect IS curve? You should first indicate which element in the goods market is affected using Kingston-Cross diagram. That means the goods market diagram with demand equal to output, something like this, and then discuss how this would affect the IS curve for A. Okay, for A, basically, obviously, it is talking about investor, right? So if there is anything to happen for the IS is talking about goods market, right? And in the IS, you of course have many different components, and C plus I plus G plus X minus IM, something like this, right? And which item will be affected? If you are talking about IS curve, you are talking about which item C plus I plus G plus X minus IM will be affected. And obviously, you are talking about the investor have more confidence in the economy. So it should be, investment that will be affected. That seems to be quite obvious, right? So this is investment. But investment, if you still remember the model, the for CCA model, it is affected by, output or interest rate. Of course, if you have a specific model, you might consider something like this. Perhaps something like this. Okay, this is a linear investment model that is saying that output is positively affecting investment and interest rate is negatively affecting investment, something like this. Okay, but now this is a confidence effect. The investor have more confidence in the economy, and because you have a sign that there is an economic recovery. Okay, in other words, everything supposed to happen in future. In future, right, you will have booms. So firms may be able to make more profits. If you already have booms, firm can make profit. But now it is a recovery, a sign of recovery. So that is something happen in the future. In other words, if it is what happen in future, it is not something happen currently that will induce you to invest more, right? You may think of course, if you are more confident, you might want to invest more because of the better future, because of the higher profit. Why people would like to firm investor, right? They want to invest more because if they can earn more profit, they would like to invest more, right? But why the investor want to invest more? Is it because currently the output is already increased? If output is already increased, of course you want to invest more. But now we are not talking about this. We are not talking about the output is already increased. Because we are just talking about confidence. You are confident in what happened in the future. So it is not due to output is already increased, so investment increase. Okay, of course. Another reason why people may invest more is interest rate going down. But is it because the interest rate has already going down? Okay, has already gone down, right? So investment increase increase the investment? Investor increase the investment? The answer is again no, because it is from this, you are talking about only confidence. Confidence is something happening in future. It is not due to currently. The cost of borrowing is already lower. No, if it is already lower, of course we will invest more. But now talking about A, you are asked to analyze what is the effect from investor confidence. So it is not due to that things that have already happened. So the confidence effect, if there is an effect due to people believe in the future, there are more profits that you can earn, so you would like to invest more, right? That must be due to something happen independent of the GDP and the interest rate level at the moment. It is, if it is expressed in terms of a function like this, it is the alpha value increase. Of course, you don't need to have the linear model like what I have written down, but the key point is that the key point must be that it is something happen to the investment, even though the interest rate is unchanged. But investors still want to invest more because they think that there will be a brighter future. Okay. Okay, now if this is the situation, then consider how can you use a diagram to express it. Firstly, you have to look at in the goods market, what happened as required by the questions, right? In the goods market, you will have firstly 45-degree line indicating output equal to demand for equilibrium condition. And then you will have a demand line, and demand line is conditional on C, and investment is conditional on a particular interest rate and G, right? Okay, let me ignore X and IM, something like this. Then you will have the output level in the goods market at this equilibrium level. In the IS curve, you are asked to do an analysis for IS curve, right? So for the IS curve, it is if investment is this because interest rate is this, then the output level is this, right? You have a point here correspond to this goods market equilibrium point, and there should be an IS curve passing through it, right? But now consider a case. Investor would want to invest more, even though interest rate is unchanged. Even though interest rate is unchanged, then this is the confidence effect, right? Because if it is caused by some other thing, higher GDP or lower interest rate, it is not a confidence effect. So the confidence effect must be reflected as even though the interest rate is the same, I1, investment is still higher. And so the demand line would go to a higher position. Well, and there is a higher equilibrium output level. And to reflect in this diagram, you must, okay, take it as even though interest rate is the same, right? But still you will have a higher output level, right? This point corresponds to this point, and that must be represented by another IS curve passing through it. So the result for subquestion A is that if there is an investor confidence effect to increase investment, it should be reflected as a Y-wave shift in the IS curve. And a Y-wave shift in the IS curve would mean that even though at the same interest rate, people would want to invest more, and so the goods market will be, okay, involving a higher GDP level, even though at the interest rate, higher interest rate, so even though at the same interest rate, right, you will have a higher output level to make the goods market in equilibrium. Okay, so that is what A is about. Now let's talk about B. B. Now, how this confirmation of recovery affect the money multiplier. Now, this is now talking about money multiplier. Money multiplier, if it is talking about money multiplier, then perhaps it would be good for us to firstly write down the money multiplier, which is this, right? And of course, for the money multiplier, you have only two elements. One is the C ratio, currency ratio. One is the theta ratio. And obviously, for the two ratio, only the theta ratio is concerned with the banker's behavior, right? And if you go back to our description, the banker's behavior is mentioned. So, presumably, this question is about the banker's behavior, how it would affect the money multiplier. It should not be concerned with the C. The C is not the banker's behavior. The C is the public. The public, they want to hold more currency relative to the deposit or not, right? But we don't see there is a description relating to the currency ratio. But we have a decision related to the banker's behavior. The banker, now we get that if the banker think that there will be a recovery, so there will be a boom, and so the firm will likely make more profit. And bank, if they lend money to the firms are more likely return the principal and interest to the bankers. So in other words, all we have got the case is that the bankers are more likely to make more loans. Okay, and this is exactly concerned by the theta. Okay, reserve ratio. The reserve ratio, of course, as we have introduced in the past, both the central bank and the banker may have influence on it, right? The central bank, if you still remember what we have discussed as the class question in the last topic, financial market, the central bank is controlling the bottom line. The bank has to at least hold certain percentage of reserve. But beyond that, the banker can hold more. Okay, and of course, before you have the boom, before you have the recovery, bankers are often conservative, as we mentioned last time, right? So, but now if they look at a brighter future, they are more willing to make more loans. If they are more willing to make more loans, you know, basically, bankers are holding, okay, reserve and loan. Okay, if they want to make more loans, they will hold fewer reserve. So that effect could then be naturally interpreted as the reserve ratio will be reduced. If the reserve ratio will be reduced, of course, the multiplier will increase. And that is the answer for B. Okay. Next. C. Suppose the central bank does control the monetary base at the fixed level. H is the same, right? H is controlled to be unchanged. How LM will be affected by B? You should indicate which element in the money market is affected. Use money demand and supply diagram and then discuss how this will affect the LM curve. Okay, money supply is basically the multiplier. Times the H. H is fixed, but because this is reduced and the multiplier increase, so money supply should increase. So that is the first thing involved in question C. And if this is true, then let us look at what happened to the LM. We start from the money demand and supply diagram. Money demand. Price output originally at Y1. Money supply. So this interest rate can make the money market in equilibrium. Okay, so when you have the output at Y1, this interest rate can make the money market in equilibrium. And you supposedly have an LM curve to pass through it. This LM is conditional on this MS, right? This MS. Okay, now, if you have the money supply that is increase the money supply. Then at the same output level, the interest rate would be lower to here. So this should be reflected as, okay, a lower LM curve, right? So the answer for C is money supply will increase, LM will shift down. That is what C is about. Okay, finally, let's look at D. D, use ISLM diagram to illustrate what will happen to the equilibrium output and interest rate. Now, from A, you have IS shift to the right. And from C, you have LM shift down. Now we combine them together. See what happens. If you combine them together, you have, okay, originally IS this, LM this. Okay, and now you have the case, for example, IS shift by a large degree to the right, and LM shift a little bit to the left. Then the new equilibrium point is involving output is increased and interest rate is also increased. Okay, but that is not the necessary result. Let us consider another scenario. This is IS, this is a LM. Okay, let us now consider the IS is shifting to the right a little bit, but LM is shifting down by a large degree. Then you will have this new equilibrium point, output is increased, interest rate is going down. Okay, now you can then conclude what will happen if the thing happen for A and things happen for C, okay, will be realized. The case is, in both cases, output will be increased. But for interest rate, is it going down or going up? Okay, that depends. So for interest rate, it is undetermined. But for output, it is to increase. So that is the answer for this question. For this question, you have to solve up that basically. You have to understand if both IS and LM shift, you may not have, okay, a definite answer for one of the variable. Okay, for ISLM, you can determine output and interest rate jointly. But if both IS and LM shift, you may have one of the variable, how it will be changed. This is undetermined, and that depends on the degree of the change of the two curves relatively, right? So that is what is required for this question. Okay, let's do, okay, another class question, which is actually a mathematical model. Sometimes you have to work with the mathematical model to get the answer. Okay, so let's see. The model is, well, you have consumption function C equal to this. G T. Okay. Investment, which is a nonlinear function. This investment is divided by I, 0.5 divided by I, so it is not a linear function, but it is still a function that satisfies our want, because we will consider interest rate should be inversely related to investment. And look at this nonlinear function. If I is higher, investment is lower. Interest rate is higher, investment is lower. So it satisfies our want. And that is also okay. Okay, X, I am assumed to be 0, closed economy. MD equal to PY times L, but L is 1 over I. So money demand function is simply this. Okay, so this question is to give you a mathematical model, and so you have to try to give some mathematical solution for us. And from this, of course, you sometimes may need to be mindful of the economic logic behind. But working with a mathematical model sometimes is also good for you to learn something. Okay, A is to solve the IS equation. Put the I on the left and everything else on the right. In other words, you would need to divide an IS, and the format of the equation is I on the left, everything else on the right, right? And IS is basically, remember, C plus I plus G equal to Y. Because X and IM equal to 0, you can ignore it. And consumption, you already have the consumption function, right? Investment is 0.5 over I. Government expenditure is 10, so you can simply write down this. But of course, for the YD, you have Y minus T, which is the YD, right? But T is 40, so you can directly write down 40. Okay, this is the case, but you have to do further manipulation because both sides you have Y, you have beta, okay. Firstly, collect all the terms with Y. And for doing so, you are not suggest to jump steps, right? Because if you jump steps, you might make mistake in exam. So in exam, you better normally write down every step. But here I walk right to jump step, right? Because I want to save our times, right? But my advice is always that if it is you to do that types of the question exams, don't jump step, write down every step. But here, let me save our time, right? We collect all these terms with concrete number together, okay? And then you will find that the number can be cancelled out, okay? Because you have 210 here, that is 20, but you have minus 40 times 0.5, so that is 20. So positive 20, negative 20, that can be cancelled out. And then, of course, this 0.5y can be written down, and you will have this, right? But I will advise you not to jump step like me, right? Okay. Okay. Collect these two terms, then you will have this. Okay. Now, the final step is you just express it. Of course, you can say that this 0.5 can be cancelled out. But you just reverse the position of I, you can then get the IS curve represented by this function, which is a very simple nonlinear function. That is our answer. This is the IS curve function. And if you draw it as a diagram, you can also see the nature of this function is that it should be a nonlinear function like this. Okay. And I would also advise you that whenever you get a function as the final solution, you may check with your intuition. For example, here you are asked to solve the function to stand for IS curve. And you know by your economic knowledge that IS curve is downward sloping, right? Higher I, lower Y. And you have to look at it. Does this IS function satisfy your want? And you look at, yes, this satisfies your want because I and Y are inversely related. Then it is more likely that this is a correct answer. If checking with your economic sense and you find that the function does not give you the wanted property, then there should be something wrong in your calculation steps. Okay? So I will advise you to always check with this. B, money supply is M, solve the LM equation, put I on the left and everything else on the right side. Okay, so then let's see. We can do it here. Okay, the money function, money demand function is this. So money supply is M, and the money demand is MD, which is equal to PY times 1 minus I. And then, of course, the required format for LM is I on the left, everything else on the right. Right. Then you just have to reverse the terms. And to reverse them, it is not very difficult for you to get the result, which is something like this. That is very easy. That is already the LM function. That is already the LM function you get. And if you draw a diagram to try to represent it, you will find out that, in fact, this should be represented by a line passing through the origin. And the slope is actually this, right? This one, right? And you see this is an upward sloping line. I and Y are positively related. Check with your economic knowledge. LM curve should be upward sloping. So you see, then this makes sense. And this is likely to be the correct answer. If you don't have that positive relationship between interest rate and output, very likely you have made some mistake in some mathematical steps. Okay. C. Solve the aggregate demand function. Put P on the left and everything else on the right. So what you need to solve the aggregate demand is that you know aggregate demand is a aggregate demand. Okay, how can we divide it? It is a combination of the IS and LM, right? As we have already introduced. But LM will be conditional on the price level. So give me a price level, you will have an output level associated with it. Something like this. But when you have IS and LM intersect with each other, they share the same interest rate. So when you divide the AD, it must be involving the IS and the LM. They are at the same interest rate. So you just put IS and LM together. IS is this. And LM is this, right? They all equal to the same interest rate. Then this should be what AD is about. For this, basically, that is what we want, right? Because AD is a relationship between price and Y. So you don't need to care about the interest rate. Just look at this part is already enough. And then you have to do some rearrangement. Because for the AD, you have to put P on the left, everything else on the right. So the format requirement is P here and everything else on the right. To do this, basically, you can do this and don't jump step. I will advise you, but here, let me jump step a little bit. Okay, you'll find that this is the result. Okay. Because if you put P to the left hand side and M to the right hand side, you will get this, right? So this is the AD. And check with our economic knowledge. AD curve should be downward sloping. And so P and Y should be inversely related. And look at this function, yes, they should be inversely related. And even you draw the diagram, you may find out a diagram should be something like this, a non-linear. It is a curve, which is okay. Now, D. If M is increased from equation in B, how would I move at the given level of P and Y? Draw LM diagram to illustrate the change. So the equation in B is the LM, right? The equation in B is this LM function. Okay, now we have D, right? If M is increased, look at this LM equation. If M is to increase, given the same P and Y, of course I should reduce. That is what should happen, right? So I would be reduced. If you draw a diagram, then that must be, originally you have this LM conditional on the original M level. But now if M is increased, but you are looking at the same output level, same output and price level, same output level here, so you will have a lower interest rate for money market in equilibrium. So the LM would then shift down in this way. When you have a higher money supply. Okay? And of course, if you look at this, not only it will shift down, the slope will also be decreased because the slope is P over M. And now P is the same P is divided by a higher M. So the slope value will also be lower. And so you will have a factor LM. So LM is to shift down, but it is not a parallel shift. Don't think that shifting must be a parallel shift. Shifting could be a non-parallel shift, like what this present case is about. So it is shifting down in a non-parallel manner, involving the slope is also changed. Okay. D. And then E. Given D, use an ISL diagram to illustrate the change in Y. And F is draw an AD curve to illustrate the change, right? So E and D is to draw ISLM and AD respectively. Okay. So E. IS is something like this. LM is something like this. Right? Originally, you have something like this. But then now you have LM shift down in a non-parallel manner. So output increase, interest rate going down. Right? Okay, that is E. For F, you are going to draw something for the AD. For the AD, you know the change is what is involved in the AD. Obviously, you originally have a price level, right? When you are drawing this LM, you have a price level implicitly, perhaps P1 here. And then you have this output level. This, right? This price level, this output level. And supposedly you have an AD curve to pass through it. Right? But now, it is MS to increase. In other words, it is not the price to change. It is the MS to change. So supposedly, it is the same price level. Okay, same price level. You then have LM to move down. And you have another output level to be generated, even though it is the same price level, because the whole change is triggered by money supply increase, not by price to change. So the same price level, higher output, and supposedly you will have another AD curve to pass through it. So for F, you will have the AD curve to move to the right. In other words, this is a change involving, a shift in the AD. For question F, it should be a shift in the AD, right? And of course, if you think of when will a curve shift, when will you have a movement along the same curve? For the AD, if it is the price to change, then it is a movement along the same curve, other things being equal. But if other thing is not equal, such as money supply is to change, right? Then you will shift the AD curve. And in that case, the money supply, if it is increased, then the AD curve will shift to the right. That is what the question of F is about. Okay, so that is the answer for class question, for the class question. I have done 2 class questions for you. If you read the lecture note, you find that there is a class question 3, and I remark it as an optional question. So for this optional question, I will not present the answer in class, but the design of the question 3, here this is question 2, right? This is question 1. The design of the question 3 is basically completely the same as this question 2. Question 2, I already do it for you. Question 3 is basically almost completely the same, but just that we replace the actual number with some parameter value or variables. So we are not using 10, 40, but you are using A, B, C, D, you are using alpha, beta, something like this. So basically, but they are basically the same. So if you're interested, you can try to do it. Basically, the answer would be almost the same as question 2, but just that the number has been replaced by variables. It would be a good exercise for you, but I'm not going to give you the answer. But you are free to try it, right? Okay. If you try it, you may be able to learn more. Okay, so that I really finished the IS and LM model, and the next topic would then be the medium one model. Okay, but you see, we don't have sufficient time to talk much about the medium one model. We don't have sufficient time to talk about the medium one model. So I would rather to stop here, right? And next week we will really start from the very beginning of the medium one model. Okay, I stop here. So if you have question, you can stay and ask your question. Otherwise, you can just leave. Okay, there is a question.
Professor?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but can you explain question 2, number D again?
Question 2, number D, right?
Yes.
Okay. And yes, I also at the same time receive a question from the chat asking the same question. The question is, could you please explain once again why the slope of LM will change and there will be non-parallel shift? I'm not sure whether it is your question, but the question is basically the same. Okay, let's see. The case is we have to look at the equation. You can't just use your economic logic. You have to look at the equation, okay? So this is a characteristic that you can find from the equation. If you look at the equation firstly, the equation is that you have money supply here, money demand here. And when they are equal, right, you have the LM, because LM is money supply equal to demand, right? But when this is equal, then you rearrange terms, then it is I equal to P over M times Y, right? So for this step, I guess you understand. But just that the step is, well, look at this equation if you have y here and you have y times the term here, then you always think of what is the slope of LM curve. A slope of LM curve is delta I, delta y, right? Delta y, delta I is. So if the equation is this, you think of what is delta I over delta y. The case is just if you have the y to change a little bit, how much the I will change? The answer is exactly this part. So this is the slope, right? If this is the slope, and now if m is higher, if m is higher, that means the slope would reduce, right? Because p divided by a higher m would be a lower value, and a lower slope value would mean a flatter line, right? So that is why it is changing the slope, not only a shift, but a non-parallel shift. Because a parallel shift is, the slope is, parallel shift is, the slope is the same. But a non-parallel shift is, the slope is not the same. Here is exactly not the same. So that result basically is from the equation. If you are not using the same equation, because all this mathematical model intends to express some idea, right? So the demand function is this, express some idea. But if you are not using this function, mathematical function, to stand for the L, you know, this is the L function. In fact, in your assignment 3, you are given another L function. Then you find that it is not necessary to have this result. So I will say this result is due to if we are using this mathematical function, then look at the mathematical functions, what the properties would be involved in it. But it doesn't matter much to our original conclusion, because our original conclusion is already that money supply increase, LM curve will shift down, right? That is not changed. That insight hasn't changed. But whether the slope should be changed or not to be changed, right? That is a second point. That is a second characteristic. Then depends on the concrete functional form, right? And now I just basically, because you are given a concrete functional form, and you have then to work with this particular functional form, what should be the result, right? But the basic insight is basically that money supply increase, the LM curve will shift down, and that is not to be affected by using whatever functional form, right? Okay, so that is my explanation. I'm not sure whether it is clear enough, right?
I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, there is another question. Can you explain question 2F why AD curve should shift to the right? AD curve shift to the right because basically the whole point is triggered by money supply increase. Money supply increase, LM reduce. That is quite clear, right? But on the other hand, if you look at AD, when you are talking about whether it should be a shift or a movement along the same curve, right? As I mentioned, how to distinguish whether it is a movement along the same curve or shift in the curve is that, okay, looking at this diagram, the relationship is between P and Y. So a movement along the same curve should be, okay, other thing being equal. If price change, how the output will change, right? So for moving along the same curve, you require the price to be changed. But to shift the curve would mean that other thing. What other thing? All other non-price factor. If it changes, then it will shift the curve. Here, the change is exactly a non-price factor, which is money supply to increase. It is a non-price factor, so it will shift the curve, right? And why it will shift it to the right? It is because if money supply is increased, the output is higher. Output is higher. Even though the price is the same, output is higher. So AD will shift to the right. That is the reason why. Okay? I hope this is clear. Okay. Okay, any other question? If no question, you can leave.